Hello, can you guys hear me now? Are we getting any sound at this point? Hopefully we can get a little bit going on. Oh, you can hear me? Amazing. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what the freaking problem is. So let's switch over to the webcam and make sure that this is also working. It evidently required a hard restart of everything. No settings changed, so I'm not exactly sure. Some weird quirk in OBS. All right, can you all continue to hear me as I have changed over to this camera view, just to confirm? Can you hear me now? Amazing. All right, well, let's get back to it. So we've lost about 20 minutes, but I'm going to carry on. What I was describing to everybody previously is that what I have done for these Armada Squadrons, which you may be familiar, looks something like this. Let's turn on this other light here so we can get a little bit more visibility. So this is a standard Armada Squadron. These are some TIE fighters, and they come supplied unpainted. There's some of the few miniatures in the Armada line that actually don't come supplied painted. So in order for me to more readily hold these, I have taken a plastic frame and I have drilled into it with a hand drill, or otherwise known as a pin vise. So it's just this little small hand drill here. The size of this bit is very similar to the size of the posts on the Armada ships. You could certainly just use these existing stands if you wanted to hold on to these, but I like to keep them separate because I don't want to get any paint on this clear rod that's part of the base. So I have opted to just take some plastic frames. I just drill a hole into the top there, and then I just place the guys inside. So I'm currently working on plans for a campaign with some friends of mine for Rebellion in the Rim for Armada, and I'm going to be doing Phoenix Cell and Commander Sato in a Pelta. So I wanted to paint the Ghost, and I wanted to do one of these A-Wings in the kind of blue and white scheme of Phoenix Squadron. And then I was also going to, possibly if I can find the time, I might do a Phoenix Squadron X-Wing as well. So to prepare all these miniatures ahead of time, what I have done is I primed them all in gray, and then I hit them from above with a little bit of white, and that just kind of helps define some of the shadows. It makes using some more transparent paints a little bit easier to achieve a little bit of contrast for these. So that's how I've prepared all of these. I've got a number of different ships here. I've got some TIE fighters, and this kind of shows you the before and after. So they come supplied like this in just a flat gray. I went through and I kind of trimmed off a couple of the mold lines and some of those other things. Because we'll be using some washes on these, I think it's a very good idea to take a little bit of extra time and take any of the mold lines off of the miniatures you go. So that's just a standard TIE fighter. That's about as easy as it gets. That is essentially just starting off with this gray, a light wash over top of the central details, and then painting in those panels with black, and then using the side of your brush to hit them up with some more gray. But I'm going to focus a little bit more, because we've lost a bit of time due to audio difficulties. I'm going to focus on these two ships today. So what I've started off with for the base coat is I wanted the white to be a little bit warmer for the Ghost. So I took some Mojave white, which is it's very light, but it still has a little bit of yellow in it. It's more of a tan. And I went ahead and base coated the Ghost with that color there. For the details, what I'm going to go about and do is I'm going to kind of pick out all of the different armor panels first, and then I'm going to apply a flat wash over top of it to define a lot of the details and a lot of the recessed areas. There's a couple different ways that you can go about these washes. You can either utilize a standard acrylic wash, much like we've used, which is in previous streams, where you just kind of thin down the paint and let it go where it needs to. Or you can utilize a oil wash, which Will Schick talked a little bit about in his clone painting video on our stream on Wednesday. So the idea with a oil wash is that you thin down the paint with mineral spirits. It is specifically oil paint, and the mineral spirits can then be used on a Q-tip or a shop towel, something to that effect, to wipe away the raised areas after the wash is dried or while it is still drying. So it's kind of a nice way to keep your finish very clean, and is actually the method that we use for the production of our X-Wing miniatures. So they paint all of the base coat colors down on there, and then to add all the definition, a wash is applied over top and then wiped away from all the raised areas, just leaving it down in the cracks and crevices. So I'm going to try to cover a little bit of that a little bit later on today, because I find that that method is great for trying to make your Armada squadrons match your capital ships. So let's proceed on. So I've got a reference over here of the Ghost. The Ghost has a number of different markings on it. It's got some yellow, some green, some blue, kind of like a salmon color over top, and then some grays as well. So I'm going to start off with that blue color because it's one of the most defining colors. And for that, I like this Caspian blue for that. It's a little bit more neutral of a blue. It's not quite so saturated, and I think it will look great alongside the color palette that I'm trying to achieve with this. So I'm going to shake this up and add a little bit to my palette, and then get to making some marks here. For this task, I have opted to use a size 1 brush, so it's a little bit smaller than normal. Normally we're using kind of size 2 that has a little bit more, but because we have such a tiny miniature that we're working with, I think that a little bit of finer tip and tons of paint on the brush is not quite as vital as it normally would be. Sergeant Striker, interesting. You just cut the top off the Q-tip. Oh, for removing some of the that paint, you can use a Q-tip, shop towel, etc. But they actually have these kind of specialized Q-tips that model making companies use, because panel lining and a lot of the techniques that we're talking about here is a pretty well accepted technique in model making and model painting, like in traditional like cars and things like that, airplanes. And you can certainly find a lot of those supplies at your local hobby shop that carries model kits. All right, so we're taking a look here on the Ghost, and it's got some areas that need to be picked out. So it's mostly these panels here. And when it comes to tiny detail, and I've kind of talked about this in the past, I like to kind of bridge my two hands together. I've got my pinky and my thumb here, and I've choked way up on the brush so I can hopefully get a little bit more precision as I'm going through and painting. So I'm not too concerned with getting down into the cracks here. I mostly just want to hit like the raised areas as much as I can, because that black wash going over top is going to help define all the shadows for me. So I'll just kind of carefully paint in these tiny little details in blue. And any areas where I've kind of made mistakes, before we apply the wash, we'll go back in with that base coat color and kind of tidy some of that up. So the Ghost also has some blue panels that kind of run towards the rear of the ship on either side of this kind of central section here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick out these panels with that blue as well. Okay. And over here on this side. And I do recommend, if you're planning on painting a bunch of squadrons all at one time, if you can find a colored spray that matches the basic color that you want to use, that is certainly a good way of going about it. The base coating stage is probably one of the most time-consuming parts of this whole process, so that'll certainly help you out. I'm just going to get a nice base coat on here, and I've gone a little bit outside the lines, but that's fine. We'll just save that for a little bit of a touch-up phase here in a second. Okay, and then there are some little tiny markings back here, so I'm just going to indicate that a little bit. Some of these things are so small, they're going to be hard to really pick out. So this is going to be a bit more of an impressionistic view of this ship. It's going to be a little summarized, I suppose. Okay, we got those sections, and now we've got some stark contrast and some yellow. And rather going with like a straight bright yellow over top, I'm going to take one that's a little bit more subdued. I like this Sahara yellow for that. So it's a little bit more of a mustard color, I suppose. And if we want to brighten that up, we can add some additional layers over top with a brighter yellow. But just to start off for this base, I like to use this color because it covers pretty well, and it's a little bit darker, so it'll give me a bit more contrast against the whole color of the ship. take a little bit of this yellow here. And there are a couple little lines along the top. And I just brought up a reference that I found online of the ship. I'm actually looking at the X-Wing version of this ship. So this looks like it kind of follows along the front of this little panel right here. Got like a little yellow mark here. Another one that falls on this side. And then this back section right here, right before where this is the attack shuttle, you can see it's very teeny tiny in there. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to be a little freeform on this. I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple additional marks because the reference that I have does not have the attack shuttle in it. So we're just going to kind of do our own slight modification of the color scheme, and then I can always go back in and touch it up. Okay, so we've got a couple additional kind of yellow lines up there on the top. And then we've got a deeper green in there too. And for that, again, I'm going to go with more of a neutral kind of green, and not something that's not quite as saturated as normal. And for that, I like this this German uniform from Vallejo. I've had issues with excess paint sticking on ends and causing loss of detail. Oh, and priming, I see. So I find that what helps out with priming, and if you have access to it, an airbrush certainly is a nice way of getting a nice thin coat across. But you know, the other bit is that you just want to keep your distance. I mean, you always want to spray your primer from, I would say, about 18 inches away or so. I think whenever it starts to pool and kind of coagulate a little bit, that's what creates the most problems. But and I think, you know, actively using like a decent primer intended for miniature painting is always a good move too. They just seem to have a little bit of a finer tooth to them. I have found some great automotive primers and stuff in the past that have worked well for me, but I can never really argue with the results from a primer intended specifically for painting miniatures. Okay. We'll pick out a little bit of this green here. These details are so very small. There's just going to be a little bit of a touch-up here and there that we're going to have to go through and do. All right, and then we've got these panels on the back that are also this green. And over on this side too. All right. Now I just want to touch this up a little bit. Take care of any sort of like stray marks with that same base coat color. Just kind of tidy it up a little bit. Any spots where we went a little bit outside the lines. Help. Over here. All right. And now we've got kind of a salmon-y kind of pink color that goes on. And for that, I'm going to take a little bit of this this pink flesh here, and I'm going to add a little bit of red to it just to make it a little bit more saturated. Are we still having a problem with the audio? Is it still duplicating? This is very odd. I didn't have any of these problems before, and now that all of a sudden they're kind of cropping up. Still duplicating? Well, thank you all for taking a bit of time to help me troubleshoot this. I don't know what is going on with the audio today. It is very odd. Yeah, I agree. Double up is better than no audio. Well, I think I'm just going to soldier on with it. Hopefully you guys can endure it. I'm not exactly sure what the issue is and why it is duplicating the way it is. Okay. Anyway, so we've got this kind of front little panel here. This is this kind of salmony color here. And then we've also got a little section here on the back of either side of this turret section. On the top, looks like this goes down like this. And over on this side as well. All right, so we're starting to get some of those basic markings in there. Let's paint those engines in the back. That's kind of a darker gray. So I'm going to go with that with a grapheno gray here. So when it comes to the acrylic washes, I think a lot of it depends on how. I typically like to put an undercoat underneath it. You don't have to. I've had good results without taking that extra step. But I find that a gloss coat to kind of protect the acrylic paints, especially if you're going to apply like a heavy wash over top of it and then wipe it away, is generally a good practice, because sometimes that added pressure and just the I guess the elements of the thinner itself can kind of eat away at the paints and the surface. So I think if you're doing like a larger application, or if you're going to be really removing a lot of materials, it's a good idea. But it's also kind of dependent on exactly what oil paints you're using, what you're using for a thinner. Typically, I use white spirit. It cuts through the paint really well, but it also is a little caustic and will kind of eat away if you apply too much pressure. So I think it's going to require a little bit of experimentation. But I think if you're worried about it, I do recommend a varnish coat over top is a good idea. A gloss varnish will help the oil wash kind of move into the cracks a little bit more readily, because the surface will be a little bit glossy and a little bit more smooth from the gloss coat. Okay, so we're going to paint these engines here towards the back, and they go further up into the actual craft a little bit. So we're going to start about right here, kind of move our way back. Just get a nice base coat on these engines here. But I do find that the the oil wash technique it does require a little bit of prep. It's a little foreign to some people because they're so used to just thinning things down with standard water. You know what? I should also mention, when it comes to oil paints, be very careful about oil paints that say water mixable oil color, because those will not thin down or be erased, so to speak, with the mineral spirits like a standard oil paint will. So when you're going to the store and you're getting ready to buy some oil paints for this purpose, make sure you get standard oil paints and you don't get this water mixable type, because this is kind of a weird hybrid and it is not good for that intention. I have made that mistake in the past, trying to use the water soluble type and using some mineral spirits to do it, and it did not help. here and do this. Underside of each of these, the backs of the engines nice and flat. Yeah, I think yellow for the, you're asking, is it typical to do the accent colors before the base paints? I think with this particular application, because I'm going to be applying a wash over top of everything afterwards to kind of tie it all together, I like to pick out all this stuff. And it's easier to tidy up the details with a flat base coat color than it is to apply a wash and then try to mix up some sort of middle ground that's going to fill it all in. So yeah, I would recommend, if you're going to approach it this way, that you go ahead and paint in all the details first, and then apply the wash, and then wipe it away. And then, if you wanted to after the fact, you could go back in and add additional highlights over top. So there's kind of a black little turret up here on the top. Go ahead and paint all that in there. And while I have this black too, I'm going to go ahead and paint the cockpit of this A-wing up here too. But I have found that, yeah, the oil wash approach certainly saves a ton of time. It's a little intimidating at first, but once you get your head around it and get familiar with the materials, it's very useful for batch painting your squads or repainting X-wing ships or terrain. It is very, very useful for terrain as well. All right, and there is a tiny little cockpit up here. We're just going to put a couple little dabs of black in here to suggest that. And the most important thing with this is, we're mostly just trying for like a good overall impression of what the ship looks like. Okay, and there's a slightly lighter gray for the panels on the top. So I'm just going to mix up a light gray with a little bit of the engine color that we used and the hull color, just to make it slightly darker. And then pretty much from this point down, it's just a little bit darker than the hull color. Okay. Oops, looks like it does not go on the top part there, so I'll touch that up in a sec. It's mostly like these little kind of ribbed parts here on the side. Okay. Now before I go through and actually apply the wash on top of this one, and while this one's drying, I'm going to switch over to the A-wing. I'm just going to go back in through here and just tidy up a little bit of these little errant marks, just so they look nice and clean, as much as I can. This part here. And some things will probably be revealed as I continue with this that will show some additional details that I should probably address. Have I done any ship repaints yet for Armada? I have done one. I don't have it here though, unfortunately. I'll show it to you guys in a future stream. I repainted a consular class for the clones. But I'm definitely thinking about it. The clone ships and the separatist ships are kind of like high on my list of things to repaint. But yeah, it's very enjoyable. I've been thinking about repainting my SSD too. That is a bit of a project though. That's going to take a bit of time. I really like the new factions. I think they're super fun. So far in the campaign that we're playing, the Munificents especially are proving to be very, very, very potent ships, and they match my playstyle pretty well. I like to have kind of more offensive ships for my commanders and admirals to go on, as opposed to putting them on flotillas or smaller ships. I just kind of like to get them up in the thick of things. But for now, I'm mostly focusing on rebels and trying to get Sato and his squadron synergies to work in an effective and cool way. Yeah, Nerf Herder 2187. We're asking for submissions on Instagram. So we just recently put out a call for Star Wars Legion, in which we're asking people to paint their commanders. But yeah, we're also going to start to do monthly themes for X-Wing and for Armada as well. Like we want to see anybody that wants to hobby up our miniatures. Like if it's for any of the games that we make, we definitely want to see it and show it off to other people. And yeah, recognize you for your efforts too, because it's always cool to say oh man, the company that makes these games recognizes that I'm a good painter or I did a cool thing, and we love to show off that stuff. So yeah, we'll certainly be doing that in the future. And for those that don't know, in a couple weeks we'll be doing a big streaming event. If you guys haven't heard about it, we've been kind of pushing it pretty hard on our social and on these streams as well. But we have tons of different hobby seminars planned. We're going to have a schedule for all that coming up here pretty soon. That'll let everybody know what's going on, and lots of different topics, lots of different stuff to cover, and pretty diverse offering, and expert painters like Dallas, Will, myself even. Just sharing our some general knowledge and some techniques that will hopefully be applicable to a wide variety of miniatures and not be so specific. And we have lots of new product reveals, lots of new stuff to show off. So we're very excited about it. It'll be a good time. All right, so just a little bit more tidying up of this stuff. Just getting it largely ready for the wash. So those are most of the markings on the Ghost there. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up a little bit of this wash. So I'm using white spirits, as I mentioned before, and lamp black paint, oil paint. And I should recommend that you do not use your good brushes for this. We'll cover this before, but it's the mineral spirits and the oil paints themselves. You kind of just want to have dedicated brushes for this specifically, because they just won't wash up very well. You can only really thin them with more oil paints. And yeah, you just don't want to ruin your good detail brushes with this stuff. Okay, so I've mixed this down so it is pretty thin. I can just show you this little palette here. You can see it. So this is essentially just a bit of oil paints and that thinner down to a point where it's still transparent, but it runs down off the sides. If you pull it up here on the side. And then, as opposed to just going through and just putting a big massive coat over top of the entire thing, you'll find that if you just kind of touch this into the cracks, it'll start to just kind of chase around a little bit. And I think that could probably be a little bit thinner. So you just want to take this, and if you just touch it in there, you see how it just zips right around through everything? Just little light touches, and it'll start to really help define everything. And a lot of that is just the capillary action of the oil paints is just a little bit thinner. It's a little bit more flowing than water. I won't claim to know the physics behind it, but it just in general will just kind of zip around and kind of chase all these panels pretty well. Now you'll notice it's pretty dark over top all these raised areas, so that's where the second step of this process comes in, where you I like to use a shop towel personally as opposed to a Q-tip, because I find like the little fuzzy bits from the Q-tip sometimes will stick to the miniature, and it just requires a little bit of cleanup, and sometimes it gets matted down against the miniature and it looks a little weird. So I like to use the shop towel, just dip in a little bit of the mineral spirits for this process of the cleanup. And you can do it while the paint is still wet if you like, or you can wait until it has dried if you like as well. Now, we didn't paint any of these details on the bottom, so I'm not going to spend very much time in there because I would just go through this exact same process of base coating all the stuff and then putting a wash over top. You'll find that after you've applied this wash, sometimes it will make the surface of the miniature behave a little bit differently than normal because it's oil and water kind of interacting with one another. So I like to kind of save this towards the very end and have most of my painting largely finished ahead of time. But the end result of this will look consistent with your other Armada miniatures, unless you decided to repaint those as well. But this is just a general technique that I think works pretty well, and it provides really quick results, and it's pretty effective. So any of these areas where it's a little heavy, I'm just going to kind of wick that away a little bit and try to move it around. Okay, cool. So while this is drying, I will now transition over to this A-wing and start to get some of the base coats down. So going back to my other brush, I've set aside the one that I've already used, this kind of ratty one here for the oil washes specifically. And now I'm just going to go through here and paint in. And because the stream got off to a slow start, I'm going to go a little bit overtime today, just to give you guys a little bit more content. All right, so let me pull up my reference here for a Phoenix Squadron A-wing. I know they've got blue on the sides and blue on this upper part, on the tail fin sections. So it looks like they pretty much go all the way up to a little bit on either side of the central cockpit. So I'll go ahead and paint in here. The guns themselves are not this color. And we're just going to do a couple different coats, like a couple thin coats over top of it, just to get nice, even coverage. This paint is thinned down a little bit, just so I don't obscure detail. And then if we turn it to the side, it looks like the top of this fin is also the blue. This side as well. Get in here and do the insides of those as well. But I would certainly set up like 2 or 3 of these squadrons all at a time. Like if you were just doing this on your own time, it's just going to be way quicker than just doing them piecemeal. And that's where these kind of branched frame bits are pretty handy, because you can just set up multiples on a single thing. But I mean, I also just have like a cup full of a bunch of these that I've just kind of set off to the side. So I'm liking the look of that blue. I think it goes in just a little bit more. It comes in from the corners of this fin, and then extends down. I'll try to get some straight lines in there. Cool. Okay, and then there is a blue stripe on the top of the cockpit towards the back here. Let's get that in focus a little bit better. That runs there, and then this part goes down to here. Okay. And then there's a tiny white stripe that goes in the center of this blue. It looks like it's just on the other side. Just pull that down like that. Probably go over that one more time just to make it pop a little bit more. Okay, there we go. So what kinds of Armada squadrons are you guys excited to start painting? Or let me ask this, I guess, what X-Wing ships would you like to see me cover in a repaint video in the future? My current front runner is doing a bunch of scum ships up in the mining guild colors. Painting yellow sounds like a lot of fun. Drop some spoilers too. Well, during the streaming event, they're definitely going to cover a lot of upcoming stuff. Anything that we haven't revealed yet for the new Squadron packs that are coming up. I know that we're going to show off pretty much all of the remaining cards for the Armada stuff that's coming up. Yeah, there's going to be a bunch of different things we're going to cover. And lots of new things that we haven't announced yet too. All right, cool. And then there's just a little bit of red that also goes on this ship. These little accent marks. So I'm going to get a couple. I'm just going to put one up here on the front. One like that. And then I think they have like just another little dot on either side. These are so small that you're mostly just shooting for something that's going to read from a distance. You have to make a couple compromises on the scale and size of some things. All right, now I'm going to take a little bit of white. Just going to tidy that up a little. All right. Those bits will make this little red mark just a little bit more slight. Get that little cockpit area that goes around the top. All right, cool. So now that that is done, I'm going to go ahead and apply my same wash to this so you can see how that looks. And then I will start to work on erasing some of the raised areas on the Ghost so you can see how that process is. All right, so again, we're just going to kind of just dab this on just real lightly. So it'll start to fill in some of these cracks. And some of the detail on this. I'm just going to wick some of that away, so it'll just save me a little bit of effort in the long run. Less cleanup. Coming back and doing this later. Okay. And if you find that you want to go back in and rebase coat things or pick out additional details or things over top, I do recommend after you've applied your oil wash to maybe hit it up with a matte spray primer, or not primer, you don't want to do that, spray varnish, just because that will ensure that you're not going to have any sort of weird interactions of the oil paints and water-based acrylics over top, because as we all know, water and oil don't mix. Okay. Give me 1 second, let me grab a towel. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I like to use kind of a shop towel, something that doesn't have a lot of little spindly fibers or anything on it. Kind of keeps itself together pretty well. So I'll typically use something like this. And then I'm just going to dip that in a little bit of the white spirit, so it's just got just a little bit of that moisture there at the top. And then if you just like wipe away very lightly the raised parts here, it'll kind of erase any of the wash that was on areas that are not in shadow or in recess. And we'll just kind of help tidy up things in general. But just very light pressure as you're doing this. You can also use a brush if you like, if you really want to kind of minimize the pressure. And you can just kind of pull any of the oil wash off of those raised parts and kind of down into those cracks. So you'll see up here at the very top, a little bit too much pressure and it's kind of eating away a little bit at that paint. So that's something you want to watch for. So again, a case to test out your what you're using as a thinner. There's lots of different types of mineral spirits that you can potentially use. But this one in particular has added just a little bit of, it's eaten away a little bit at the acrylic paint, so I'll just have to touch that up later. It'll just kind of help it look a little bit cleaner and a little bit more more refined, I suppose. This technique we'll be covering in a terrain stream that we're going to be doing over the mini extravaganza coming up. So you'll get a little bit more of a insight into oil washes and how you can integrate those into your standard painting habits. Cool. So going up here to this A-wing, we're going to do the same thing. So you can see it's gotten a little bit muddy here. So we're just going to use that. And you can see it just kind of wicks away that wash just very effectively. And you can just leave it down in the areas that you really want it to define the shadows. And just makes that end result look a lot cleaner. I actually use a magnifying device pretty often when it comes to miniature painting. You know, it will exaggerate it, and you have to, you know, all of your emotions are 2 or 3 times exaggerated when you're looking through it. But as soon as you kind of get your head around the magnification, it's very useful for just clarity and brush placement. I think it's a pretty handy way of going about it. I've seen some nice lamps that have like a ring light on them, and the central part is a magnifying glass, and that works pretty great. I've also seen some little glasses that you can get that magnify things. Those tend to kind of they make me a little disoriented because I like being able to like look through the magnified thing, but if I'm always looking through it, it just, yeah, it kind of messes with my equilibrium. I think it affects people in different ways. All right, well, that is kind of a quick and dirty version of the ghosts. Hopefully you can understand you know, why I chose to use the oil washes over top. I think it, you know, the end result, it looks pretty consistent with the other Armada ships and how those appear. We've also gone through and done an A-wing. Let's spend a little bit of time for some additional touch-ups here. Pick out a couple little bits. We'll see how this paint reacts to the wash that I've already applied. Hopefully it will not do anything weird, but again, if you're concerned about it, you can always put a layer of a spray varnish over top that will ensure that you won't have any sort of weird separation of the paint or anything from it interacting with the oil-based pigment that's underneath it. So far, so good. I can just kind of go through here and tidy up some little areas. Cool. Yeah, it's looking good. I think that'll match my existing ships pretty well and should look pretty sweet on the table. I'll spend a little bit more time taking a look at some reference. I do think I'm going to put a little bit of an engine glow on the back of this. So I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow and a little bit of white. And the Ghost, I do believe, has a yellow engine glow on it. So I'll just put a little dab here on each of these. Cool. Yeah, and I will do some investigation on what is going on with my audio setup this time around. Again, apologies to everybody for having to endure me going through and troubleshooting things, but no settings changed since the last time I did it, and I didn't have any problems last time, so just figuring it all out. Technology, heck of a thing. Got a perfect spray paint for the Razor Crest if it ever comes to Armada. Yeah, that would be cool. All right, that's looking pretty good. I think, well, I got a little bit of time. I'm just going to do a quick and dirty TIE Fighter, just to show you guys that process right quick. So again, we've got, this kind of standard TIE Fighter. I've applied the spray over top of everything. I just primed it gray to begin with. That's like the lion's share of the work done for you. But all you really need to do for TIE Fighters is you just need to go through here and I like to start off with the panels first and go all the way to the edge and then go around it again, because like when you're doing this you might go a little bit outside the lines of it, and then just touch up that edge with a lighter gray afterwards. And I'll just kind of turn this thing in my hand so this is a little bit more accessible and is an easier angle to paint. And then the inside of it, I just painted all black, but you could, if you wanted to, go through and paint in the little ribbed lines like they have on this outer edge, but that's up to you. And a lot of these techniques and that basic kind of oil wash approach is very similar to how I repaint X-Wing ships. It's almost identical. Base coat everything, make sure it's nice and clean with solid and easy to repeat colors, and then apply the wash and then wipe away the excess bits, and then go back in and do another touch-up if you need to. This will probably take a couple coats to get a nice flat black that we want. And then for the central part, I'll go ahead and apply just a standard acrylic wash because it's kind of smaller, and you can see that you can get very similar effects. You don't have to use oil paints. Like, it's not the only way you can do it. We just want to show you a lot of different tools, a lot of different approaches for this stuff. And if you find that it's something you want to try out, you should do it. I think that's the best part of miniature painting is the experimentation. It's trying new things, and coming up with your own methods, and then sharing those with your friends. Extra bases and stands for Armada made available someday. Should be easy enough. Lots of people could use them. Is that just for your other kind of other ships that you want to use, or just to have as a replacement in case you break some? There's a bunch of reveals coming up for the upcoming Armada ships. All that stuff is scheduled to release in April. Though we are experiencing some problems with our supply chain, so we'll certainly keep you guys updated if any of that changes. But so far, we have not heard much on that front affecting the release dates of the X-Wing Squadron packs or Armada Wave 10. All right, so we've gotten all that on there pretty well. Now I'm just going to take some of that black paint, I'm just going to thin it down just with a little bit of flow improver and some water, and I'm just going to paint it in over top of all this. And I think that you know, the most defining characteristic is that kind of rounded window in the very center part, so I want to make sure to get nice even coverage on that. Then I'll thin down the wash just a little bit, and then also just paint it over these details too, just to make these things pop out a little bit more. But TIE fighters are super easy. Like, these are just kind of two-color affairs if you prime them gray first. Okay, and then once that's down, I'm just going to take a lighter gray here. And in this case, for the highlights, it's a little bit lighter than the actual base coat color I used, but I think that's fine. Something that is close to match, nice neutral gray, unless you want to go more blue-gray with your ties, kind of whatever version you prefer. And then I'm just going to use the side of my brush, and I'm just going to go around you know, the edges of these panels here, and it'll just help tidy up everything real well. All right, well, I think for next week, I will probably do something very similar to this, but I'm just going to do it for X-Wing ships because we haven't done anything for X-Wing yet. So go ahead and post in the chat there what specific kind of stuff you might want to see. Again, my current leaning is Mining Guild Yellow, but if you guys have some other cool ideas or some sort of schemes that you'd like to see, I have a bunch of X-Wing ships that I would not mind repainting. Just turn that guy so you can see a little bit better. The U-Wing would be cool. I love that ship. It is very cool. One of my favorites. All right, well, that's a quick and dirty TIE fighter. I think you can, you know, use the side of your brush and hit up these little raised areas, but they are very slight, so be careful that you don't go a little bit outside the lines. And but you can always go back in and touch them up a little bit. Okay, well, this is where we got today, despite some technical difficulties that we ran into. Got a little bit more detail on the A-Wing I'd probably want to apply, and you know, we painted a TIE fighter as well. So thank you all very much for joining me again. It's always a pleasure to do these streams. I will continue to work out the kinks on the audio setup. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there. And we will be back next week. We stream every week from Tuesday through Friday with myself, Dallas Kemp, and Will Schick, covering a wide variety of different miniatures. Again, as a reminder, 18th through the 20th, we're going to be doing our mini extravaganza, where there's going to be tons of different content, lots of panels, lots of different streams over the course of the weekend and Thursday and Friday. So we look forward to seeing you all there. So be safe. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Take care.